Notate like this, not that. Common music notation mistakes you could be making. Music copying, i.e. notation, is an art. Although certain aspects can be as rigid and exact as a science, it can also be inexact with many rules, but with just as many exceptions. Clinton Romer, author of The Art of Music Copying. Welcome back to Jazz Arranging class. Today we're going to talk about notation errors. Now, with the creation of computer music notation programs in the 80s, hand-copied music, something that had been done for hundreds of years, it quickly started to become extinct. Programs such as Finale and later Sibelius became the standards for notating music. It took a good decade or more for computer speeds to pick up, and if you were around back in the 80s, you'll remember, or the 90s, you remember that it took about 30 seconds just to get the screen to redraw after editing anything. It was pretty painful, to say the least. So you would think that these effort and time-saving notation programs would completely eliminate notation errors, but in many cases they have not. It is still up to the arranger to format the music in such a way as to make it easy as possible for each player to render the sound from what they see on the page. Of course, we no longer have to worry about drawing notes, stems, crescendos, but there are still many aspects that people get wrong and they should be aware of when they're setting up their parts and their score. So what I'm going to do today, here's a great quote. Music is the universal language of mankind. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So it is the universal language, but if you don't present the information to the players, they can get that language wrong. So let's begin. I'm going to go through some issues that you may have. I know when I was researching this for this video, I actually did have some things that I was doing wrong in my parts and in my scores. So let's begin, and we'll start with the first one. And I want you to just see. Now, feel free to stop the video anytime you'd like, and you can just kind of look at these examples and see what is wrong, and then I'll show you the correct version. So can you spot the errors in this little passage here? Too many accidentals. By simply using a B sharp and an E sharp, we got rid of all of those natural signs. So a lot of times these programs like Sibelius and Finale will do weird things, and it's up to you to go back and to make sure that the information that Finale or Sibelius is generating is as completely simple as possible for the players. So we went from 10 accidentals to just 2 just by using a couple of sharps. Now generally I stay away from B sharps and E sharps, but it just depends. In this case, we got rid of so much information. Music is kind of like programming. You know, they say that when you write a computer program, the less code, the better to get the same result. So this is no different than that. It's so much easier for the brain to just see have a key signature in mind and then have those 2 sharps rather than all of those naturals going to sharps. All right, let's move on. How would you improve this one? It's in the key of E flat. Same thing. Add an F flat and a C flat. Now here again, I generally try to stay away from F flats, especially I'm a trombone player. You don't see many F flats. But in this case, it's easier to read 1 flat than it is all of those 8 accidentals as we saw in the previous one. Okay, let's move on. What is the problem here? Articulations. That should be pretty obvious. Anytime that you have notes, if there's any doubt on a note how it should be played, include an articulation. Now in this particular example, we have up here, we have 3 staccatos. This could be long and short, or this could be short, short, long. So make sure that the players know exactly how to play those notes by using articulations whenever you're in doubt. Moving on. Do you see any issues here? Take a quick look. I'll show the answer in just a minute. Should be pretty obvious, but you never know. Courtesy accidentals. As you notice, we have an A sharp. The second measure, we have just an A, which goes fine with the key signature, But a courtesy accidental gives the player, across the bar line, it reminds the player to return to the notes of the current key signature. I always, when I do the parts, I go through last. I check dynamics, and I also check courtesy accidentals in each part. I mean, it's very tedious sometimes, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Let's go on to the next one. Anything wrong with this? Now, this should be pretty obvious because Finale or Sibelius would not do that, although you never know. Sometimes you do have more control over the program. And what you need to do is make sure that with the correct notation, you should see a line. You could split the measure into 2 equal parts with a line. As you can see, well, we can go 2 beats on one side of the measure, 2 beats on the other. So if you had a 6/8, you should be able to split it down the middle with 3 beats, 3/8 notes on one side, 3/8 notes on the other. And that's the easiest way to read it. So you're going to need ties and things like that inside the measure. Okay, let's go on. What is wrong with this notation? The dynamic placement. Dynamic placement is something you have complete control over in these programs like Finale and Sibelius. So the rule of thumb, or actually the correct way to do this, according to Clinton Romer, and he's the art of music copying, is that dynamic should be placed just before the note where the new dynamic begins. Now, in reality, there would probably be some crescendos between like the MF and the F and the MP and the P, but you never know. But this is one that I did not do so well. I generally put it under the note. You're supposed to put it just before the note. So you will have to move those around a little bit when you lay out your parts and score. Moving on, what do you see here? Anything wrong? Time's up. Make marking specific. So whenever you have, this is another thing you have complete control over in Finale and Sibelius, your crescendos should reflect exactly what you want, or if you're doing copying for somebody else, whatever the composer wants, but generally it'll be your arrangement. So try not to, if you can help it at all, try not to abbreviate those crescendos, decrescendos. You'll notice that they're just short little markings. It's easy to just throw up a crescendo or decrescendo, and Finale or Sibelius will do just kind of a default length. You'll need to adjust those to where you want the music to sound. So crescendo and decrescendo should reflect exactly what the arranger-composer intended. Moving on. What is the problem below? This is one that I actually get wrong too. Chord symbols go over the changing notes. So when you have anticipations, the end of 4, the end of 2, make sure that your chord symbols go over where the change should be, not where you would have like slash notation or whatever. Okay, next one. Do you see any issues here? Time's up. Should be pretty obvious. Take a look. The phrasing. You need to lay out your parts by phrasing or score, but more so parts. 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases. Try to keep them symmetrical. You can see that in the earlier one. Let's see, go back. Okay, so there's 5. Actually, what they did was the first measure, they left it out and they moved everything up 1 measure, as you can see in this one. Okay, let's go on to the next one. What's wrong with this? Time's up. Don't combine 2 and 4-bar repeats. If you have a 1-bar repeat, just do 1-bar repeats and number them. This could be a drum part or maybe a bass part that has a recurring figure. If you have 2-bar phrases, that would warrant a 2-bar repeat, but don't combine the 2. All right, moving on. Okay, whoops. Okay, here's some, I'm going to wrap this up by just giving you some big band score layout tips. What I do and what's worked for me, and I actually got this from publishers, is I do a landscape, 8.5 by 11 paper, landscape mode, 8 bars per page. Until if you have a few bars left over at the very end, you can just make those you know, 3, 4, 5 bars, whatever. Just make sure you move the end of the music towards the left to make it a little more symmetrical. I use a 40% page reduction, and I always include measure numbers on the bottom surrounded by square box. Notice how this is pretty small, but you can still see the measure numbers. That's all you need is the measure numbers down there. Now, when you do them in the part, you can do them at the beginning of the line. Sometimes I've done them on each measure, but it does get a little cluttered. I've started to do at the beginning of each line. I probably should do, for the parts, I probably should do rehearsal letters, but I find that gets a little cumbersome as well. But that's just personal preference, I guess. So anyway, I hope you learned something. And notate like this, not that. So thanks for watching. If you do like what you see and if you've learned anything from these videos, be sure to like and subscribe. And that's about it for today. So be careful of when you lay out these parts and score, and make sure that you really check before you pass out those parts. That's it for today. Talk to you soon.